Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. Education is the one industry that permeates into everything in our society, and therefore has some very polarizing aspects. Chief among these is the issue of charter schools. There are those who feel charter schools undermine the efforts of district or traditional public schools. Others feel charter schools are a saving grace in the battle to provide students with equitable educational opportunities to prepare them for the new global economy. This is especially true in Black and Hispanic communities. Whichever side you may fall, one thing is clear. Charter schools are the only type of public school where enrollment actually grew during the pandemic. It seems that families want more of these schools and feel that the United States Department of Education, as well as individual states, should not make things more difficult for charters to gain access to startup and other funding. To help us understand the current legislative issues facing charter schools, today we welcome Debbie Veney, Vice President of Communications and Marketing at the National Alliance. Ms. Veney, welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me this morning.
I want to get into this whole conversation because it seems like it's something that goes around in cycles. Like every so often we come right back to the same issue where we talk about public schools versus charter schools versus private schools and all that kind of thing. And all of the issues that surround the, funding of these schools. But before we get into that, there are a lot of perceptions and misconceptions as to what charter schools actually are and what they do. So can you kind of define for our audience just what is a charter school?
Absolutely. A charter school is a special type of public school. Every charter school is a public school, and they're special because they sit outside of the school district. That means that they have autonomies to be able to do things like have a specialized curriculum, or to have a length of a school day that might be longer, or to do more instructional time in a given subject area. They also have the freedom to be able to hire their own staff. They have the freedom to be able to determine their own textbooks, and just a lot of different kind of autonomies over their budget and what they'll prioritize or not. So they're unique public schools. They're open to every kid. So there are no admissions requirements. You don't have to audition or take a test or anything like that. But if the school is oversubscribed, then that will require a lottery situation to figure out who can actually get into it. Because charter schools, as the same as any other public school, have to take every kid that comes to their door unless they don't have enough seats for them. So never a cost to attend, no admissions requirements, always public schools, and smaller, more innovative, special public schools that sit outside of the school district in order to give these school leaders and educators a lot of freedom to do whatever it is that the students need.
Now, I want to go back to one of the items that you brought up at the end of your response there, and that's about the lottery, because a number of years ago, there was a documentary put out about charter schools, Waiting for Superman. And
yes, I remember this.
and within that, you had the whole lottery system and the stress that came about because of that, and parents wanting to get their kids in, and they were very disappointed when their number wasn't called and all that kind of thing. And then there's also the argument or misconception that charter schools cherry pick the best students from a particular district. So those district schools are still underperforming. They have to work with the underperforming students, and therefore they continue this cycle of underperformance. So what actually is the truth of it all when it comes to how charter schools actually operate? Because I'm glad that you pointed out that they have to accept everybody. So how do we get from accepting everybody to cherry picking the best students?
Well, that is just not true. Charter schools by law are not able to select the students that they'd like to have. They have to take every kid that comes to their door. It's literally like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 straight down the line until there are no more spaces. And a lot of times, and particularly in Black, brown, and low-income communities, these schools are so high performing. Parents know about them and they really want their kids to go there. So you have a supply and demand issue. So you've got a school that maybe can accommodate 350 students, and you've got 1,000 families in that community that are trying to get their kids in there. So the only fair way to be able to manage that, because you can't pick and choose the kids you want, the only fair way, and it's heartbreaking because you want to be able to have every kid who wants to come be able to come, you have to do a lottery. You have to do a blind lottery. That's the law.
So I'm glad that you finally cleared that up. Hopefully there won't be that argument going forward, but although I'm sure somebody will try to rehash the argument and so forth.
Yeah, they do.
So let's talk about the numbers a little bit. Exactly, well, not exactly, but about how many charter schools are in existence in the country, and I guess, and in what states, how many states actually have charter schools?
Okay, great. There are about 7,700 total charter schools. And so that represents about 3.6 million students across the country. And some of the states with the highest concentrations of charter school, that would be certainly New York, definitely California, then some other places like Indiana, Michigan, Florida, the nation's capital, District of Columbia. They also have a good concentration of them. And those are some of the biggest ones. But we actually have charter schools in 44 states, plus the District of Columbia, and 2 territories, which are Puerto Rico and Guam.
What is the actual work of the National Alliance when it comes to charter schools? And is it only charter schools that you're advocating for, or is it for any other type of institution as well?
Okay, so the work of the National Alliance is to advocate on behalf of charter schools. We specifically work both at the state and federal legislative level to try and create favorable laws for the creation and growth and support of charter schools. It is a very, very heavily regulated sector. So we have to operate looking and working with state legislatures and with the federal government, because they actually set the rules of the game. In fact, the state and federal governments set the rules of the game for public education, period. In charter schools, the reason why they only exist in the places that I mentioned is because you actually have to have a charter school law in order for them to exist. And then the different permutations of those laws can vary from state to state, making it more or less difficult for charter schools to exist and to thrive. And you asked another question about whether we would advocate on behalf of other issues. We certainly do work with partner organizations where we have some shared interests. So, for example, we have a terrific interest in diverse teachers. And while that is not like the core of our advocacy work, we will definitely stand arm in arm and advocate along with our partners who are working on that issue. We've also had a lot of interest in the issue of accountability, which is basically what happens when children are sent to school to learn and that's not happening. What triggers do we have, and how do we make sure that they in fact are learning? What do we need to do? So we definitely weigh in on that issue. We've also stood with the disability community. We want to make sure that every child is well served in their school, whether that be a charter school, a regular district school, or any other type of a learning environment. So there are a number of issues that we definitely also believe in and will stand with other advocacy organizations in support of.
We seem that there, at least in New York, that there seems to be a preponderance of charter schools popping up in certain communities, especially in communities of color. Is that the norm across the country, or does it kind of work differently state to state? So
obviously the demographics of a particular state are going to have a lot to do with who attends a school there. So let's start with New York. That's a great example. And, your listeners are there in New York. It is not at all unusual that charter schools are going to predominantly serve Black, brown, and low-income students. So let's put some numbers behind that. Almost 70%, about 69% of students who attend charter school are Black or brown. About 62% of them qualify for free or reduced price lunch. So that is certainly the great preponderance of children who attend charter schools. Now, when you move into some other communities, like let's take Alabama, which is certainly a much more southern rural community, we also have charter schools that are growing there. Now, they're going to serve a different population, although in places like Birmingham, which is still predominantly Black, you're going to see that the charter schools there are serving a population that mirrors what that community is. But we also have seen tremendous growth in places like Utah, Oregon, Idaho. And in those places, the charter school community will mirror more of what that community is. So certainly in Utah, you don't have a whole lot of Black people. You don't have a whole lot of Hispanics. So it'll look more like the kids that are there.
And when it comes to the laws that are governing charter schools, and I'm glad you mentioned that in order for charter schools to actually come to be created in a particular state, states actually have to pass laws allowing that. And
that's right.
And again, here in New York, at least, there seems to be there was a cap that was put on the number of charter schools that could actually be created in any given year. And I think this year they were revisiting that cap once again, and we won't get into what the results were. But again, that's on the books here. So is there any type of legislation that can be governed from the federal level that will govern how many charter schools can be created in a particular area? Or is that truly a state by state kind of issue?
That is a state by state kind of issue. Charter schools are community-based schools, and they are authorized by people who are in individual states and communities and understand the needs of those communities. And that's kind of where that whole thing happens. The federal piece of this is specifically around appropriations or funding, specifically startup funding for charter schools. And the other federal piece of this is just ensuring that there's equal protections for students who attend charter schools, the same as any other public school.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is Debbie Veney, Vice President of Communications and Marketing at the National Alliance. What are some of those proposed regulations that are threatening our charter schools today?
Well, quite a few, sadly. Let's start with probably the most pervasive issue that most people in every state are going to deal with. This is something that has to do with funding for school buildings, what we'll call facilities. Now, a lot of people do not know this, but charter schools are the only public schools that have to literally pay for their own building, which is a little nutty if you think about that, right? It's a public school, but they have to go and get a lease and they have to pay for rent out of their per pupil allocation, or do fundraising in order to be able to cover those expenses. Now, it's not just the building, but it's also like the utilities, groundskeeping, all these sorts of things that taxpayers take care of for every other type of public school. And so one of the things that we're looking at in a number of state legislatures is how we equalize that and make that fair. We have situations where there are literally vacant public school buildings sitting there, nobody going there. Mm-hmm. And there are officials at the state and local level who are blocking children from being able to, public school children, from being able to access a vacant public school building and be educated. That seems crazy to me, and I know this issue because I'm in education myself, and I've seen these things going on. But that sounds crazy that you can have a building that used to house school. It is a school for all intents and purposes. For all intents and purposes, it is a school. It has everything that the school would need. It has the gym, the cafeteria, auditorium, everything that you need, but it's going vacant because it was vacant. It was vacant because there weren't enough enrollment for that particular school, or it was underperforming, or whatever had to happen for it to close down. But now
there's another school that wants to move in to open up these opportunities for students within that community, and they're being prevented and blocked from doing so because of politics.
Yes, that's exactly right. And it is crazy.
So you began your comment, and before I interrupted you, about the funding. And before I get to that, I just want to address the other issue that you mentioned, that so basically charter schools are being forced to operate very much like a regular business because they have to pay rent in the space where they are. They have to pay for their utilities. They have to pay for everything, that all the operations expenses that a Fortune 500 company would have to pay. They have to do the same thing, but without the tax breaks that the Fortune 500 company gets. So again, where's the equity in that? We talk about equity in education. Where's the equity in that?
Yeah, I can't find it. we are asking the exact same question. It seems absolutely insane that this, would persist. And it's been going on, since the dawn of charter schools from 30 years ago. Very, very sad set of circumstances. And who's actually being hurt are the children. This is the number one reason that charter schools will struggle, is because they don't have access to a facility. So you're just a community-based leader. You're someone who has been an educator. You have a passion for wanting to give back to your community. You want to open a school that's maybe culturally affirming or focused on the arts or sciences. And you apply for and get the opportunity to be able to open up a school. And then you find out you got to go and figure out some kind of way to get a line of credit and get a school building, all these kinds of things that educators should not have to take on. And no other educator in the public ecosystem would have to do this. When you're a new school trying to open up and it's a district public school, you've got a building, you've got desks, you got computers, you got the funds to be able to pay staff while they're planning to get the school up and running. And charter schools are the only public schools that do not have that support. They force these schools to figure it out on their own and then hate them when they do.
Wow. That's very eye-opening. So let's talk about some of the other legislation. We talked about the funding and how the startup funding is kind of, being blocked for charter schools. Is there any other type of funding as far as sustainable funding that charter schools can get access to that they may now be kind of blocked from, or actually have some roadblocks put up in front of them for?
Yeah. So let's talk about what's going on right now with the U.S. Department of Education. Mm-hmm. So there is a federal pot of money, which is about $440 million. This may sound like a big number to many people, but let me contextualize that. It's less than 1% of the Department of Education's overall budget. This is the only pot of money that can be used to both start up new, scale, and replicate charter schools. So let's say, Kevin, you and I have started up a charter school together, the Debbie and Kevin Charter School. And we're doing great. And our families love it and our kids are doing great. And let's say our school, we started out a school that was an elementary school. So it was serving like maybe pre-K up to like sixth grade, fifth grade. We're finding that when our children graduate from our school, there's not really a great school to feed them into. And we say, well, what we need to do is maybe expand that. And we need to make this like a K through 12 school. So that type of way to help us to be able to continue operating and also to be able to continue serving these students and let them stay with us as they grow on, we need that federal pot of money from the Charter Schools Program in order to do it. And the Department of Education has come up with a really, really onerous set of proposed rules that would make it very, very difficult, especially for small schools like the Debbie and Kevin school, because it's just the two of us. We don't have a large infrastructure around us. We don't have, we don't have analysts who can go and fill out all these complicated forms that the government is asking for. And we don't have the time because we're trying to educate our children to jump through all of these rings of fire and to go through all of this burdensome bureaucratic morass. And the impact of it is that people simply will become frustrated, not apply for the money, And then the Department of Education will say, well, they're not applying for the money, so they must not need that. And they will take it away.
Let me ask you this really quickly before I want to get more into the money and some of the other legislative issues that are going on right now. But would that be a reason that many charter schools close after their initial charter is up? Because a lot of schools, they get this charter for like 5 or 7 years. And after that, I think the numbers at one point were 50% of all new charter schools close after their first charter is up. They don't even get renewed for the second charter. So, and of course, in the public eye, they're going to think, well, that they must be low performing schools. Then that's why they don't get approved or they don't get that next charter. So with the lack of money for whatever reason, for sustainability, for expansion, would that be a reason why some charter schools just don't continue after a while?
That's the number one reason. The number one reason is really tied right back to that whole facilities issue. Trying to maintain a lease, having to fundraise when they should be just being able to focus on teaching their kids. So spending more money on the classroom than they're spending in the classroom. That is a huge problem. And then also what you were saying about the complexity of charter schools. I mean, I don't know if people know this. On average, they're funded at 25% less than other public schools, which is also terrible when you look at the population of students that are served by charter schools. So these are kids with the very, very greatest need who are actually getting cheated out of 25% of the funding that is due to them because they're public school students. So you've got charter schools that are already working on 75% of what every other school would get. And then on top of that, they have to pay for their own buildings. And then they have difficulty with adversaries that don't want to renew their charter. It's a very, very hard work. And I'm always amused when people talk about how it's some kind of a money-making venture. This is far from it. These are very, very community-based people. More than 60% of all charter schools are run by individuals, just single folks who are in that community and care about it. And it's hard. It's hard to keep the doors open. It's hard to provide the resources that these kids need. They have to fundraise and they're working like around the clock 7 days a week. Are there any other obstacles or roadblocks that this new governmental regulations exist for charter schools? There are some attacks, and it's not at the federal level, but this would be more state by state. So like we were talking about caps in New York City. So that is a maneuver to literally just stunt charter school growth. So there's demand, but they literally just put an arbitrary cap on the number of schools that can exist. And here's another thing that a lot of people might not know. Once the charter has been granted, so if the school, for whatever reason, is no longer open, as we just talked about, that charter still counts on the list of charters overall. So that can't be reused. So you've got a certain, right, isn't that crazy? Wait, so the school's no longer functioning, but so that doesn't get removed off the list to allow another school to open up in its place. Right. Okay. So because that school no longer exists, you can't just say, okay, cut that off. And so now instead of it being, let's say the number was at 20, the cap was at 25. And two schools no longer are functioning. So you would think that you would go down to 23. That means two slots just opened up. But that's not the case. You would think that. You would think that, but that's not the case. Okay. Exactly. That is literally not the case. And so one of the things that, folks are advocating for in New York City is even if we can't lift the cap, could you just let us use the charters that exist already for schools that are no longer open? And as simple as that is, it is a fight. I guess the real ironic thing or funny thing about this is we place so much emphasis on education, right? We keep saying that education is the key to success. Education is the key to everything. And without education, you can't get into anything. You can't really do anything. So if we have such a emphasis on education and we see that the numbers support that families, increasingly number of families want more charter schools. What's the problem? Why is this so much of an issue with creating charter schools, with supporting charter schools and so forth? I scratch my head about this almost every day because this is the work I do. I think that a lot of it really comes down to control. So people who oppose charter schools do not like the fact that these schools have the autonomy and the freedom to do whatever it takes for these kids. I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a middle school that's a charter school. And so you've got these kids coming into your middle school in fifth grade. These fifth graders are reading at, call it a second grade reading level. In order to get these children caught up and ready to compete for a great high school slot and to be ready for college, you got to work double time to catch them up. And so if the school district only allows 45 minutes of instructional time in reading for these children, that may not be enough. And so a charter school has the flexibility to be able to say, maybe we need to do a double block of reading. Maybe we need to, have some after school programs as well. Maybe we need to have some summer enrichment programs. And you have the freedom to be able to do that in a charter school. But there are collective bargaining agreements that make that impossible at district schools. And they don't sometimes like the idea that there is this parallel track where the same children who people gave up on and said they'll never be anything. You can't teach these children. They're never going to be successful. You can take that exact same population of students, put them into a charter school, and within 18 months, they are caught up and beating the pants off of their more affluent peers on any standardized assessment you want to give them or any other way you want to measure it.
A lot of my listeners are advocates and community advocates and everything, and they will take up just about any cause that you put in front of them. So where can our listeners go for more information on this fight that charter schools are going to if they want to give their support as well?
I would really love for them to check out a couple of websites. So one of them would be publiccharters.org. And that is the website for the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. That's a great source of news and information. And then another that I would point people to is Charters Work. Charterswork.com. This is probably even more appealing to some of your more grassroots advocates because it talks about what advocates are doing, why they're passionate about this fight, and it gives people opportunities to take action. A lot of times, people are doing their day-to-day work, and they may not even know about some obscure piece of legislation that threatens these schools. And that's our job to night and day be keeping an eye on all of these potential threats to charter schools and then raising the flag and letting other people know what they are so they can raise their voices and fight for these schools.
We would definitely like to thank our guest today, Debbie Veney, Vice President of Communications and Marketing at the National Alliance, for coming on to our show today.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me. It has been a pleasure to talk with you.
Once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.